Picture a single-story building on a strip mall corner. Fogged-up windows, a hand-lettered sign taped to the door. Nobody behind a counter because there isn't one. No neon, no logo, no reason your eye would ever stop on it. Inside, the only sound is a row of dryers turning, and nobody's watching them. The idea itself isn't new. The first self-service laundromat, a washateria with just 4 electric washing machines rented out by the hour, opened in Fort Worth, Texas in 1934 for people who couldn't afford a washer or the electricity to run one. 90 years later, the format hasn't really changed. What's changed is how much money quietly moved through buildings that still look almost exactly like that one. According to IBISWorld's 2026 industry data, the roughly 18,000 laundromats still operating across the U.S. generate about $7.2 billion a year between them. Industry researchers put the average individual store's annual revenue anywhere from $150,000 to over $400,000, depending on the source and the market, with top performers in dense cities clearing far more than that. That's steadier, most months, than the sit-down restaurant 3 doors down, which is fighting for the same foot traffic with none of the built-in repeat customers. This is a laundromat, and here's what actually matters about it. It doesn't make money selling you a wash. It makes money renting you a machine you're not legally allowed to own. Think about who's actually standing in that room on a Tuesday night. Renters whose lease says no washer, no exceptions. People in walk-up buildings with nowhere to put one, even if the lease allowed it. A night shift worker with 2 hours before her next shift starts, and exactly one place within walking distance that can wash a week of clothes in that window. A retired couple 2 doors down, whose building was built in 1968, long before anyone wired it for in-unit hookups. So the laundromat isn't a backup plan for them. It's the only plan that ever existed. One industry survey puts roughly 60% of laundromat customers as renters, with a median household income around $28,000 a year, and about 87% of them live within a mile of the store they use. They're not comparison shopping between 3 laundromats and picking the best price. There usually isn't a second option close enough to matter. They're walking to the one that's there, with a basket under one arm and exactly as much patience as the wait time allows. That's the whole business in one sentence. You're not selling a product, you're renting back a necessity to people who have exactly one option, and that option is you. There are 4 numbers that decide whether that math actually pays off for the owner, and one honest complication that's starting to reshape who wins in this industry at all. So if you're picturing yourself running one of these, here's where the actual decisions live. Number 1, revenue per machine. A washer in a decent spot can pull $1,000 to $2,000 a month. A dryer, somewhere between $600 and $1,200. Multiply that across 30 or 40 machines, at vend prices averaging $2.75 to $4.25 a wash, and $1.50 to $2.50 a dry cycle, and a building full of coin slots starts adding up to 6 figures fast, in amounts small enough that no single customer ever thinks about what they're contributing to. But location decides almost everything else. Picture 2 identical laundromats 3 miles apart. Same machine count, same prices, same hours. One sits among single-family homes, where most people already own a washer. The other sits surrounded by apartment buildings, where almost nobody does. So, if you had to put your own money into one of the 2, which one would you pick? The homeowner neighborhood store might land near $150,000 a year. The apartment neighborhood store might clear $400,000 or more. Same machines, same quarters, same price per wash. The only variable that moved was how many people within walking distance had no other choice. Most first-time buyers get this backwards. They buy the laundromat that's for sale in the neighborhood they already live in because it's convenient to check on, instead of counting how many renters actually sit inside that 1-mile radius the customer data keeps pointing to. There's a second lever inside this same number that a lot of owners leave untouched: wash and fold. Roughly 60% to 70% of laundromats now offer some version of drop-off service, and industry data suggests it can lift total revenue by 20% to 40% on top of the coin-op business alone. Because you're charging by the pound for labor, not just renting out a machine. On a store already doing $300,000 a year, that range works out to something like $60,000 to $120,000 in added annual revenue, often for little more than a folding table and one part-time employee. Same building, same machines, a second income stream layered on top for the customers willing to pay to skip the folding. If the math is this favorable, a captive customer base, six-figure average revenue, almost no accounts receivable to chase down, why do so many owners still end up with thin margins or none at all? Number 2, the percentage utilities eat out of revenue. Well-run laundromats with modern, high-efficiency machines can hold utility costs to around 15% of revenue, according to industry cost breakdowns. Laundromats running older equipment or skipping maintenance to save cash short-term can see that climb past 40%. That gap alone is the difference between a store clearing 30% net margin and one barely breaking even on the exact same revenue. Here's why it swings that hard. A modern Energy Star washer can run on around 14 gallons of water a load. Older machines can pull 25 to 40 gallons for the exact same load, the exact same wash. That's not a rounding error. Multiplied across every cycle, every day, for years, that gap alone can add up to tens of thousands of dollars in water costs over a machine's working life. The water bill becomes the decision maker behind the whole business. Not the rent, not the lease terms, the water. Fold-in gas, electricity, rent, and routine maintenance, and industry benchmarks put total operating costs at roughly 60% to 80% of revenue, leaving the well-run stores with net margins around 20% to 35%. That's the entire range between a laundromat that's genuinely working and one that's technically open but functionally underwater. Number 3, the machines themselves. Because they're a depreciating asset, not a fixture you install once and forget. A commercial washer from Speed Queen, the company that's been building coin laundry machines since 1908 and is still considered the industry's most durable name, runs $1,500 to $5,000. Its dryers run higher, up toward $13,000 for the largest commercial units. Dexter, a competitor known for the same kind of longevity, prices similarly. A full equipment retool for a mid-size store, replacing worn machines across the board, can run $150,000 to $500,000, depending on how much of the plumbing and electrical needs upgrading alongside the machines themselves. The single biggest player in this entire industry, CSC Service Works, doesn't put its name on a single storefront. It just owns and services machines inside thousands of buildings, the largest company operating in a $7.2 billion market that most of its own customers couldn't name if you asked them. And underneath the equipment sits a cost that rarely makes it into anyone's spreadsheet: attendance. Someone still has to empty the coin boxes, refill the soap dispenser, and fix the dryer that's been down for a week. And where laundromats do employ any staff at all, labor can account for 25% to 35% of total operating expenses. A laundromat that looks unattended for too long stops looking safe, and a laundromat that stops looking safe stops getting walked to. It's also one of the last cash-heavy small businesses left. Every coin box is a target, which is one more reason those unattended stretches are never actually free. Number 4, the buy-in and eventually the exit. Equipping a laundromat from scratch runs around $125,000 just for the machines in a mid-size facility, before rent deposits, plumbing, electrical work, and build-out are added on top. Buying an existing, already running store is usually the cheaper path in, and it typically trades at 3 to 5 times its net annual income. So a laundromat clearing $80,000 a year in profit might sell for $240,000 to $400,000, depending on the lease terms, the equipment's age, and how replaceable that customer base actually is. That valuation multiple is really just the first 3 numbers, priced by a buyer who already knows what to check. What's the real utility percentage? How old is the equipment? And how many renters actually live inside that walking radius? If a seller's utility costs already sit above 35% of revenue on the books, that's not a footnote in the listing. It's a signal the next owner is inheriting an equipment retool almost immediately, on top of whatever they just paid for the business itself. Skip that homework, and you can overpay for a laundromat the same way you'd overpay for a house with a cracked foundation nobody mentioned during the showing. Here's the honest complication. Even with 94% to 95% of laundromats surviving their first 5 years, a better track record than restaurants, which hover closer to 50%, the total number of US laundromats has actually shrunk almost every year since 2020, with industry trackers putting the decline somewhere between 0.5% and 1.4% a year, depending on the window measured, even as the market's total dollar value keeps growing around 1.6% a year. This isn't just an American pattern either. One global industry survey puts 5-year laundromat survival rates at 85% to 95% across countries generally, with markets like Japan, Germany, and Canada landing at the higher end of that range. The business model itself is sound almost everywhere it's tried. The market is growing, the store count isn't. Part of that gap is simple underperformance. Owners who never fixed the utility percentage or budgeted for the machine retool, priced out by their own equipment. But part of it is a newer kind of competitor entirely: pickup and delivery laundry services and self-service locker networks, which can enter a neighborhood for as little as $5,000 to $15,000 in equipment, instead of the $200,000 to $500,000 a full storefront requires. They don't need a lease, a storefront, or a single walk-in customer. They need a partnership with an apartment building and an app. A traditional laundromat is exposed to whatever happens in its one neighborhood. A locker network spreads that same exposure across dozens of buildings at once, which is a structural advantage the strip mall model was never built to answer. So, the numbers put back together. Revenue per machine is really a function of foot traffic and renter density, not square footage, with wash and fold as the lever most owners leave on the table. The utility percentage is the single biggest driver of profit, and it's set almost entirely by how old your equipment is. The machines themselves are a depreciating asset with a 5- or 6-figure replacement bill built into their lifespan. And the buy-in price only makes sense once you've actually checked the other three, because a good multiple on a badly run store is still a bad deal. Get all 4 right, and a laundromat behaves like one of the steadiest small businesses in the country. Recession-resistant, cash up front, almost no bad debt to chase. It held its footing through the 2008 downturn and through COVID because renters don't stop generating laundry when the economy slows down. If anything, more people become renters. Get them wrong, and none of that resilience protects you. You're simply one of the stores quietly disappearing from an industry that on paper is still growing, possibly replaced by a locker in the basement of the building your old customers live in. Go back to that strip mall corner. Fogged windows, hand-lettered sign, no one behind a counter. Somewhere close to $400,000 a year can move through a building like that, mostly in quarters, mostly while its owner is somewhere else entirely, 90 years after the first 4 machines went in a room in Fort Worth for people who had nowhere else to wash their clothes. Nobody's putting a plaque on it. It's never going to look like a business. It's going to keep looking exactly like it did the day it opened, because looking unremarkable was never a flaw in this business model. It was always the point. But the next time you walk past a laundromat, the real question isn't whether it's making money. It's whether whoever's running it understood water, machines, foot traffic, and the price they paid to get in. Or just liked the listing. If this changed how you see the building on the corner, subscribe. There's a new story on the invisible economics of ordinary places every week.